Ready? Play.
Good afternoon, good morning, good day to you, wherever in the world you are. I'm pleased to be joined by Marcus Buckland. How are you doing today, Marcus?
I'm trying to keep warm and just about succeeding.
Good. Of course, you had something to keep you warm yesterday, which was the Women's FA Cup draw, the cup competition, the main cup competition we have in the UK, or in England, I should specify. That went without a hitch, you said, right?
Yeah, it's always a little bit nerve-wracking doing a draw, because if something goes wrong, there isn't a lot you can do about it. If a ball goes missing, if the same ball somehow appears twice and you've got the same team playing each other, then, well, my producer said on my ear, don't worry, I'll talk you through it. But I don't know what he'd have said. I don't know what I'd have done. But it all went smoothly, so I was very pleased about that.
I imagine with live TV, though, Marcus, you've got it. There's been a few times in your career you've had to think on the hoof and be spontaneous.
Oh, a number of times. I mean, I can remember when I first started at Sky and I was pretty inexperienced, and I remember forgetting the name of the guest who was sitting opposite me, which was horrendous. I was so rattled at the end of the afternoon, I said goodnight to everybody. It was like 3 o'clock. I mean, there have been moments like that. There was another time I was actually doing a schoolboy international, the Victory Shield in Northern Ireland, and the floodlights failed, and we had to fill for about 15 or 20 minutes. And at one point, Jerry Armstrong, the wonderful ex Northern Ireland and Tottenham and Watford striker, who knew everybody, ran off and just brought this guy over and just basically shoved him in next to me. I'm live on air. I've got no idea who he is, but I kept looking at Jerry, and he was kind of doing this with his shoulder, and I couldn't. He was trying to tell me that the guy's name was Jimmy Shoulder. I mean, descended into farce at that stage. So there have been moments, but we always try and say to each other, it's not heart surgery. No one's going to live or die as a result of the program. So try and put it in context and just do the best that you can.
My biggest fear, actually, for my side of things doing this is probably not pressing the record button. And you've got someone as prestigious as yourself, Marcus, or it did happen with Pam Shriver recently as well. Although, fortunately, I caught it after 30 seconds. I was like, Pam, I've got it. I didn't press the record button. So if we can go again, because I don't want to lose these people and make such an error such as that. But listen, talking of draws, I don't know if you have a view, Marcus, on draws for tennis tournaments and how they are managed or not managed, if you like. I know Wimbledon kind of just announces it. The WTA or the ATP finals is quite similar as well, where it just appears on a screen. I would like a bit more transparency, and I would like to see a show like you did yesterday, for example.
Well, actually, Wimbledon does do a show. I've actually, via our Live at Wimbledon radio, voiced the Wimbledon draw for the past 5 or 6 years. I think actually, I don't know if you can visually see it or not, but we cover it.
Okay.
And I do agree with you, actually, because I think it's part of the excitement, certainly for the slams, to try and build it up a little bit. I think that is definitely one of the things that the sport should look to try and improve upon. It's tough because, you know, a slam draw goes on for a long time, and there's a lot of complicated procedures as you put the seeds into certain sections and all the rest of it. So it's not necessarily the most gripping of viewing, but I do think there are plenty of people out there who would enjoy it. So that is something that I have recommended in the past, actually, John, something that hopefully will be further enhanced in years to come.
I'm wondering if your Wimbledon feed is not available outside of the UK. I don't know. I just remember trying to get hold of it in the summer, at least, and not being able to do so. But listen, I think it's an interesting point, and there's so many tennis boffins out there, such as myself, that we are into the draws now more than ever, and all that. But listen, let's get to the WTA season, Marcus. You nor I were there, but I guess we have to start with Australia. Ash Barty, of course, winning that tournament. We'll get into what happened next. What are your memories of Melbourne this year?
Well, my main memories actually are the build-up, of course, because unfortunately it wasn't about the tennis. It was all about Novak Djokovic and would he or would he not be able to play. And obviously that was, incredibly frustrating for him. And I think it was a really bad look for the sport and for everybody involved. Perversely, I also think it gives tennis a lot of publicity. And to a certain degree, all publicity is good publicity. But having then started to watch it, you're seeing Ash Barty do what she so desperately wanted to do. And when she beat Danielle Collins in the final, I'm sure just about everybody else was thinking that this was going to be the start of a year of dominance, because she's already shown over the past 4 or 5 years exactly what she can do. She was able to deal with the pressure cooker atmosphere at her own slam and win it. And I'm thinking record-breaking season coming up. Little knowing the announcement that she was going to make just a few days later.
Indeed. I mean, actually, we didn't even know this expression existed, but we were expecting maybe an Iga Swiatek style year from Ash Barty. But of course, in January, that expression didn't exist. That was going to be a few weeks later before that would kick into gear. I also remember Danielle Collins and her run and her aggressive tennis. Bearing in mind, she's had some health issues over the previous 12 months in particular. I was really pleased to see her make the final. She was, I believe, a double breakup in the second set, let that slip, unfortunately. And in the end, Ash Barty wins the tournament without dropping a set. Are there any other distinct memories you have of that tournament?
Well, I must say I'm a big fan of Danielle Collins, like you. I love the fact that she is who she is. She's not afraid of that. She talks from the heart, and I think it was a terrific story all round. It's funny because the hours aren't great when it comes to the Australian Open. It's the one slam that I haven't covered for a long time, so I don't feel as immersed in it as I have been with some of the others. But I just think the venue's fantastic. The crowd gives a real crackle and buzz from the first session on day one right through until the final. So I think it's a fantastic slam. I always wished that Sky back in the day had got hold of that, and then we could have bookended the 2 slams, having Australia in the January and finishing with the US Open. But yeah, certainly it was Ash Barty beginning what I think we all thought was going to be an extraordinary run, and that didn't prove to be the case.
What happened, Marcus, or what were you thinking? Were you shocked by the announcement? I was shocked because of her age and because of where she was at in her career. Were you as shocked as anyone with the announcement she made retiring in February?
Yeah, I actually remember specifically where we were, because we were in Miami. We were starting coverage of the Miami 1000 event. Now, I may be wrong in terms of exactly what moment she made the announcement public, but I remember going to Miami thinking we were going to be talking more about Ash Barty, although she wasn't due to play there that particular week. And suddenly, overnight, the night before I think we went on air, the official announcement came through that she'd retired. And I was with Tim Henman, Daniela Hanchikova, and we're all looking at each other and going, what? This cannot be right. What is going on? And what does it mean in terms of the women's game? And I think everybody was hugely disappointed, because I think, I'm sure everybody thinks she's was a fantastic player to watch, and a player that the game did not want to lose. But equally, you've got to admire the inner resolve that she displayed by deciding that enough was enough. I was frustrated. I was really disappointed, but I had to respect the decision that she made. We all did.
You think she'll come back?
I actually think she might.
Me too.
It's a complete stab in the dark.
Yeah.
But I just think that maybe 18 months, well, she's nearly a year gone now, isn't it? 18 months down the line, maybe she's starting to think, there could be some unfinished business out there. So I hope, from a purely neutral point of view, that she does make a comeback. And we can speculate all the time about Swiatek against Barty at their best, who would win, but it would make it a fascinating summit of the women's game, that's for sure.
That has been a debate, actually, in recent weeks in particular, over who would emerge better and how would have 2022 looked had Barty not retired. But we'll never know. And listen, I think you and I are in the minority. Most of the people I speak to who probably know her better than I do, that's for sure, think that she will stick to it. But let's wait and see. This won't be the first retirement section of today's show, of course. But listen, I spoke to you just before we went on air about which tournaments you attended. You were at the second leg, if you like, of Iga Swiatek's Sunshine Double. By now, she was really clicking into gear. She obviously just done the Sunshine Double. I think that was 3 tournaments in a row for her. What were your thoughts through this period of the year and Miami in particular?
Well, the thing that really struck me, and I remember talking to Tim Henman moments after we clarified the Ash Barty situation, and Iga Swiatek, therefore by default, was the new world number one. And
Yeah.
the question, it's a tough question to be thrown at her. Did she at that stage deserve to be the world number one? She was effectively there by default.
Yeah.
And what struck me straight away in Miami was how she built on from her success in Indian Wells and put together, in fact, that extraordinary 37 match win streak. What was it? 6 titles in a row. Well, that
Something
is
like that.
one status. She answered the question straight away. And that remains to me the most significant performance by anybody, male or female, in the tennis world this year in 2022.
Any other particular memories of Miami? I mean, you were there covering it. She beat Osaka in the final, which, funny enough, as I was just doing a bit of research, I'd forgotten about that.
There's 2 things that stand out from Miami. First, the horrendous humidity. Anybody unfortunate enough to follow me on Twitter will have seen a picture, a topless picture of me sitting next to Tim Henman, who was absolutely shocked because Tim is the ultimate gentleman. The humidity was unbearable, but he still got it. He would have had a tie on if he'd had one there, but he was looking the part. I just had to come in and take my shirt off. I said, I think, Tim, this is the way forward for Wimbledon on hot days. And he just gave me a dismissive look. I had never worked in such hot and humid conditions. I've also got to give Henman a lot of credit because he saw Naomi Osaka play, I think it was her first match, and I can't remember who it was against, but he said there and then, she's clicking into gear. She's going to go a long way this week. And as you rightly say, she got to the final, but she was put in her place in the final. And that was effectively, of course, as good as it got for her this year.
I mean, Iga put many people in their place this year of Osaka's level and elsewhere. Any thoughts on Osaka and her previous 18 months?
I have to be very careful because we know that she has gone through a lot, and I fully appreciate how damaging, how awful mental health issues can be. So I'm not going to go into great detail, but I've been really disappointed, obviously, with the way her career, her results have tailed off, with some of the things that she has done, perhaps with some of the advice that she has been given. And she's gone from being such a dominant player on hard courts in particular to almost being an afterthought. And I really hope that she can get the balance back, because we know what she can do, rediscover a love for the sport that you've got to have, because it's brutal. And I've spoken to so many players currently playing retired, and unless you've been there or played at a high level, I don't think you can fully appreciate the physical and mental demands this game puts upon you. So it's very easy to sit back and criticize and say, look, you've got all this money, just focus on what you're doing. It's not as simple as that. She needs to rediscover a passion for the sport. And I really hope she does, because we need as many world-class players as possible. And quite clearly, when her A game is there, she is one of those.
Absolutely, and really with her back, for example, and Raducanu, if you like, returning to the form that she showed towards the end of 2020. I could go on. If Ash Barty was to come out of retirement, I mean, how exciting would this be? Along with, you know, a resurgence from Sabalenka and Sakkari and so on and so forth. We'll get into those two in particular, perhaps as the year goes on. I mean, with Iga winning those two, I guess going into the French Open, where I also know you were there in attendance, there was only one person to beat, and it was going to take an incredible achievement for someone to stop Iga in Paris, right?
Well, it was. And yet going into the French Open, there was a lot of thought that Ons Jabeur could have the greatest 2 weeks of her life. And I will never forget the fact that she actually was knocked out before lunch on the Sunday, because, of course, starts on the Sunday. And she was out by 1-2 o'clock in the afternoon, which blew away perhaps Iga's biggest rival. But I had no doubt, I have to say, no doubt at all that she was going to go all the way during that fortnight. And okay, she might have blinked a couple of times, but she was playing some extraordinary tennis. And, you know, it's incredibly exciting to see Coco Gauff get through to the final as well. I've been a massive fan of Coco's from the moment she burst onto the scene. I mean, it seems such a long time ago now, but it was only a couple of years ago at Wimbledon when she was 17, and she played Venus Williams and she announced herself. And I was so glad to see her get through to the final, and actually really, really gutted for her the way that weekend went, because if I'm not mistaken, she lost both the singles and the doubles final.
Yes, she did. Yeah.
And she was visibly upset. And actually, Coco hasn't won a title this year, and I really hope, actually, one of my big hopes for 2023 is that she continues to kick on and gets her hands on some silverware. But Swiatek was magnificent during that fortnight in Paris.
Yeah, and regarding Coco, and we're going to talk about Iga a lot throughout the year, how can we not? But yeah, I think it was nice that she got to the French Open final. A lot of people probably don't associate with North Americans with being quite able on clay, but perhaps that is her best surface. So it was good to see her get to the final. She, unlike pretty much like everyone else in that tournament, I think only Zheng took a set off Iga. And unfortunately, she had some illness issues throughout that match, so she couldn't make the second and third sets competitive. But yeah, listen, if she can maybe eliminate one or two double faults, because that could be all the difference it is between making it and not making it to, say, to a slam final, and perhaps the forehand as well. Any final thoughts on the French Open before we move on?
Well, I just want to say how I've been so impressed by the transformation of the French Open. I must confess that when I first started covering tennis, initially actually for BBC Radio, and we're going back a long way because I'm horrendously old these days, but back then it was without doubt my least favorite of the slams, and the weather actually always awful then. But I've been lucky enough to go for the last 3 or 4 years. Obviously, there was the autumn version, which was a little bit bizarre, a bit like having the World Cup in Qatar in November, and just couldn't quite get over, freezing my nuts off watching tennis late at night in October. But I just transformed Roland Garros. The atmosphere is incredible. I know some people aren't very happy about the scheduling for the night session now, and that's something they've got to look into. I feel really actually for the organizers, because if they're only going to put one match on, and of course they want to put some women's matches on, but it's very, very risky when you're playing best of 3 sets, which broaches another big argument about whether, certainly at some stage in a slam, should the women go to 5 sets as well. But I suppose that's for another podcast. But I just think it has become a magnificent slam. And I must say now, although I love the razzmatazz of the US Open, as long as the sun is shining in Paris, those 2 weeks at the end of May and the start of June have become arguably now my favorite on the tour, because I do radio for that format. It's not quite I haven't got to put the makeup on and look my best every day, which becomes increasingly struggle as well. So I do really enjoy Roland Garros.
Yeah, me too. And I know what you mean about some of the improvements. I think 2018 was the first year I went, but probably you go back a lot further than that. But I even since 2018, there's like, oh, this is kind of a cool setup with a bit more greenery and an opportunity to hit a ball, for example, for kids and adults. A few more drink stands and a few more of this going on. I do think they could do with 1 or 2 more drink stands, if I'm honest. The queues can get a bit lengthy, and there seems to be plenty of open space for that. But listen, I completely agree. There have been some improvements on the fan experience. I'm going to throw a hot potato in your direction, Marcus, now. Amelie Mauresmo, first year as tournament director. You mentioned the late starts. You also mentioned, I think, in terms of the women playing at night, but I think only one of the 12 or 13 night sessions, or maybe it was a bit less than that, 10 or 11 night sessions they had, featured a women's match. How do you think Amelie dealt with that little storm, and also any views on anything else I just mentioned?
Well, I think if you were to ask her, she would probably admit that given a second chance, she would have answered that question slightly differently. Having said that, I do, as I mentioned before, I have sympathy for her. I mean, she was effectively parachuted into the situation. She didn't organize the scheduling. And when you've only got one match, and the French, and I spoke at length to several people about this, and it's traditional. The French want their mainstream entertainment to start at 9 o'clock. And because of that, you're not going to be able to play 2 matches beginning at 9 unless you risk going really late into the night, which you can anyway if you get a 5-hour, 5-set men's match. So it's a real quandary. I'm also going to be very careful because, of course, Amazon have the rights to that night's session, and I have no intention and no reason to criticize them at all because they're bringing a very new, funky style to the way they cover Roland Garros as well. But I will be intrigued to see what they do, and I think common sense would dictate that they maybe start the session certainly an hour earlier, and even if you don't get a men's and a women's match, maybe you get some sort of veterans match or something just to give the crowd some entertainment before the main event. I think that will probably be the way forward. And I mean, my other feeling is, but I don't want to go on about this 5-set, 3-set thing, but frankly, I actually would like to see women play the slams over 5 sets, and that would therefore solve the problem straight away if you just want to have the one match.
Yeah, from the audience, I mean, I was there in a fan capacity this year. Some of the late nights and trying to get back to the and trust me, my journey was nowhere near as bad as some, I'm sure. But listen, you live and learn. I thought she was very humble as well in taking some of the criticism on board. I know that Catherine Whitaker from the tennis podcast, but also Amazon Parish too. I know that she was sort of had some frank conversations with Amelie during this period, and Amelie seemed to be like that. She was very much listening, and was difficult for her in her first year. So listen, hats off to her, and good luck with the future. Wasn't long though, of course, the transition from the French Open and from are you with Wimbledon? Are you radio or TV at Wimbledon?
I'm radio. I do the live at Wimbledon radio with I'm always proud to mention this statistic, our worldwide audience of 53 million, which goes to every part of the world and beyond. We get these incredible tweets and emails from people up mountains, in deserts, wherever you wouldn't think of. We hear from somebody in monasteries in the Himalayas, you name it. And it's fantastic. I feel a real sense of pride and privilege to be able to hopefully just bring a little bit of the flavor of Wimbledon to some of these far-flung parts of the world that simply don't have conventional radio and TV coverage.
Well, Marcus, I have to say, I thought maybe you were doing a bit of DJing. I mean, I was looking at this image here, and you're certainly enjoying spreading the word to the millions, that's for sure.
Yes, that jacket actually belongs to Claire Curran, the former Irish Fed Cup player, who's also a very active part of our team. I cannot remember why on earth I put that on.
It's a little tight fitting, if you don't mind me saying.
Yeah. I mean, I actually think I kind of look the part there, but we have so much fun. It's a long day. I actually do the breakfast show between 9 and 11 every morning, and then come back between 1 and 5 or 6. And we've got fantastic positions. I'm in centre court, so I see everything on centre court. We've got commentary of every match on centre, every match on number 1. And we've got reporters and all the other main courts as well, and out and about trying to give a flavour of what's happening. So it's a fantastic couple of weeks. Occasionally, my sartorial elegance does appear to desert me, though.
Listen, I love that roof, by the way. I was fortunate enough to have a press pass this year, and hanging out on that roof is a lot of fun. You overlook about 3 or 4 courts. You can often get to see matches that perhaps you wouldn't get to necessarily pay attention to. The ambience is pretty good day and early evening, and if the weather holds out, and from memory it pretty much did throughout the 2 weeks this year, it's a lot of fun there on the roof, but also Wimbledon in general. Listen, back to the court itself, the tennis court rather than the court that Novak was in January. What are your early memories of the first week, say, at Wimbledon on the women's side? Of course, we had Iga going out, the end of her 37-match run against Alice Cornet.
Yeah, I mean, it's strange because when I cover Wimbledon, if I do anything on the radio, a match comes and it goes, and by the next day, it's like, oh, what happened? She won, he won. It's quite terrifying. I remember once actually seeing Jamie Murray up on the roof, and I'd reported that he'd gone out in the doubles and he'd won. So I tend to lose the plot during that fortnight. Obviously, the main focus for all of us during those 2 weeks is the Brits. Are we going to have a fantastic story? I have to be very careful on the radio because we're going to a worldwide audience. But inevitably, my focus started to be on Cam Norrie. And I was really keen for him just to fully introduce himself to a British audience. And equally, what was Emma Raducanu going to do? We all know what Emma did do in New York the year before. We all know that it's been something of a struggle. And I don't think that's come as a surprise to anybody. And during those 2 weeks, the focus was going to be firmly on her shoulders again. She didn't have a great couple of weeks. I almost felt that it was good that she got that out of the way and she got the US Open then out of the way. And I think actually great to get this year out of the way. And without talking too much about Emma, I just hope that they come up with a solid coaching base, whoever it may be. Let's stick with a coach. And I don't think, unfortunately, that's going to happen because from what I gather, the feeling within the camp is that she should have somebody teaching her volley, somebody teaching her serve, somebody teaching her this, that, and the other.
Okay.
I'm all sure that is the way to go. But obviously, there was the disappointment that she couldn't at least have a couple of victories as she had done the previous year. So it becomes a little bit Brit-centric. And then as the fortnight developed, I was sort of getting behind Ons Jabeur and thinking that, you know, this is going to be her fortnight after the disappointment at Roland Garros, having gone out on the very first day when so many people were tipping her for victory with that wonderful game, the guile, everything that she brings to a tennis court. I just love watching Ons Jabeur. I just love not just her game, but her personality as well. I think we all know that she's one of the most friendly, fun and engaging people off the court. So I started to get on that bandwagon. And I must say, when we got to the final, I was absolutely convinced that she was going to win.
Well, for a set and a bit, it looked that way. But then Rybakina had other ideas.
Well, she did. And I mean, this was another interesting story without getting into all the politics, of course. And Rybakina, you know, is not Russian. She's not Belarusian. But I think there was that undercurrent, certainly within the All England club. And again, that's another issue that I really don't want to go into. But it slightly tainted the fortnight. And the fact that there were no points available had a real effect on the likes of Rybakina. From a British point of view, I think of Liam Brody on the men's side, by the way, had a good run, didn't pick up any points. It affected the whole season as a result of that. And I also felt sorry for Rybakina because I think, you know, she felt under a lot of pressure. She handled the situation unbelievably well. I mean, there we are, seeing her holding the Venus Rosewater dish. And yet, subsequent interviews that she gave and the way that she felt she was treated at some events after that made her feel as though she wasn't a Grand Slam champion at all and that they were trying to airbrush her away from history. So it was a little bit awkward. I'm glad the final was good. I mean, she came back brilliantly.
She did.
And, you know, I was very pleased for her, but I was so disappointed for Ons Jabeur. And yet I remember about 2 hours later going back to the media area and she was doing interviews up high on the balcony. And there were hundreds of Tunisian fans, mainly Jabeur fans, making so much noise. And her husband was there. She was there. She had a big smile on her face. And I thought, okay, well, you're getting over this pretty well. And hopefully, rather than later, you are going to pick up a Grand Slam title.
Yeah, from Ons' perspective, definitely. From Rybakina's point of view as well, I think there was a time in the press conference afterwards when she sort of broke down with a few tears. She did gather herself pretty quickly and hopefully she managed to enjoy the evening. Ons, of course, we'll be mentioning her again shortly because she obviously had another run at the US Open. But it was good that you mentioned the quality of the final because I did think it was enthralling. I know that Rybakina was at least a breakup from quite early on in the third set, but there was always the thought that maybe Ons can get it back. I think I love a final when you're sort of on the edge of your seat and you don't quite know which way it's going to go. And you still think there might be another twist or turn in this match yet. It didn't actually turn out that way. But I did think of the 4 Slam finals, I think it's the only one that did go the distance this year, mainly because of Iga's and Ash's, unbelievable performances on the court. But no, I think it was a good final.
And John, that's another reason I keep banging on about this, but I firmly believe that certainly when you get to the latter stages of slams, the women should play over 5 sets, because apart from anything else, you come to a final, you get off to a slow start in that final, and you've lost that first set 6-1, and you're a breakdown within about 25 or 30 minutes, and the whole day has turned into a nightmare, and you simply don't have time to turn things around. Now, I appreciate if somebody's a set and a breakdown very early on, they might be crunched in 3 sets. But if they are, well, they were going to get crunched in 2. You haven't really lost out, but you just give that opportunity for a little sway in proceedings. And if you look at the greatest matches of all time, very few of them are not best of 5 sets. So I still firmly believe that certainly from the quarterfinals onwards, I would love to see the women play the best of 5. And I think it would lead to a lot more classic finals, which of course is what we want.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with that, Marcus. I'd love to see them do a trial period, for example, as Gene suggests here, for have all the slam finals perhaps as 5-setters. I don't think Steve Simon is on board with that. I think I've heard him talk about 3 sets and all the rest of it, but I'm with you. I think you're right. I mean, listen, as you say, the difference between a 2-set crushing and a 3-set crushing is minimal, let's say. But even if you just suddenly get to a 4 sets thing, you've got, oh, hang on a second. And I think in particular, the US Open final, which we'll come into in a bit more detail shortly, which was that feeling. I felt as though Ons was growing into that match and growing into it. And it was a pity that she couldn't take it to a 3rd set in that tiebreaker. But anyway, listen, we'll come to that in a second. Moving on, after Wimbledon, we then had a few tournaments, of which you were in attendance at least at 2 I've got on my list. Cincinnati, Let's talk about that. What were your memories of Cincinnati this year?
Well, the one outstanding memory is that this was the week where suddenly a player came firmly into, done nothing for the first half of the season, but who suddenly on the grass started to rediscover her A game, and who, by the time we got to Cincinnati, was on a fantastic run. And of course, I'm talking about Caroline Garcia. And we kept thinking, well, she's done well this week. She's done well that week. I've got a list of the titles somewhere. And then suddenly she comes through and wins in Cincinnati. And I remember interviewing her on court afterwards, and that look of sheer delight and the belief that by now she clearly had. This wasn't just a fluke run. This is a player who was very close to the top of the rankings a few years ago, who had found something in her game, and who was now actually heading off to the US Open as a possible contender. I mean, we weren't going towards the end of the year and what she might do in Fort Worth, but that is my outstanding memory, the fact that suddenly Caroline Garcia, without any shadow of a doubt, was a major player to take a very, very close interest on during the closing weeks of the season.
Somebody's predicting her to win Wimbledon next year. That's going out on a limb, to be fair, as Gary suggests. Listen, Garcia sort of fulfilling her potential, if you like, this year. Certainly in the second half. I think she beats Swiatek in Warsaw. She also had 1 or 2 notable wins, as you mentioned, at Wimbledon. But this was really the moment. And I think you're right. She goes into the US Open as a contender as a result. And she justified at least that tag of being a contender by getting to the semi-final. But we all know the service return position, which you'll have seen up close on a few occasions this season, in particular in Fort Worth. That sticks out for me. But I also felt in that semi-final against Jabeur in New York, and we're now on to the US Open, so everyone keep up. The semi-final against Jabeur, I was in the stadium for that match, and Jabeur took control early on and never let go, if you like. And I did wonder if maybe it was time for Garcia to sort of reevaluate her game. There was a couple of serves, or more than a couple, but where she just didn't have time to react because Ons' serve was so good. And I thought maybe a couple of steps back. But listen, if it isn't broken, why fix it? But my suggestion is it was slightly broken in that semi-final. But listen, I shouldn't put a negative spin on it because really she's had an amazing year. Tell us about the US. Go on, Marcus.
Good point. But I mean, she's very stubborn in that regard. But I really respect athletes who, essentially know what they have to do to be successful and are not going to compromise that. And yeah, common sense dictates you step back a little bit. But, she put together that winning run. She was to go on and achieve a lot more success. So I totally agree with you, but I kind of love that stubborn refusal to back away from her A game, and maybe that explains why for long periods she sort of disappears a little bit, and then when she gets it right, she really gets it right.
She does. And she did in the quarterfinal in particular at the US Open. But listen, talking of the US Open, any memories aside from Garcia? And we'll talk about Swiatek and Jabeur. Any other memories?
Oh, I was doing all the night sessions for Prime Video. I have never experienced atmosphere, because it wasn't just on one occasion, it was 3 times, as we had the Serena farewell party that
Yes, of
got
course.
past the first round, got past the second round, and eventually came to the end against Ajla Tomljanovic in a fantastic match. But the atmosphere inside Arthur Ashe for those night matches featuring Serena were unbelievable. And I remember thinking a few years before, when Roger Federer played Novak Djokovic in the US Open final, there was bedlam that night. Everybody was cheering for Federer, and Djokovic somehow managed to put that aside and win. But the atmosphere here went up another notch or two. It was quite extraordinary. And all the choreography as well, when Serena finally lost, and there were all the interviews and the videos on the giant screens. But just the passion, and you saw, every different type of spectator inside Ash that night, which was just a reminder that Serena has captivated everybody. People who would normally have no interest in tennis whatsoever. Everybody was just talking about Serena the whole time. Even now, thinking about it, I'm getting little tingle down my back, because it was incredible. And yeah, I honestly don't think I have ever witnessed anything like that in atmosphere terms in tennis before.
Yeah, right. I've got to ask it because I asked it for Ash Barty. Have we seen the last of Serena?
Well, I mean, she's been very clever in that she's never actually said the R word, has she? But
Yeah.
and there was a little flutter of publicity a couple of weeks ago suggesting that she might be back for Australia. I certainly am not going to write her off. I just think if she is planning on coming back, I really hope she gets herself fully fit, and B, she gets a few more matches under her belt. That's the only other thing that worries me. If she was trying to come back for the Australian Open, I'm not sure how match fit she could get in time for that, because the send off, and it was amazing because obviously she'd had a pretty uninspiring couple of tournaments leading up to the US Open. I was in Cincinnati when she was beaten by Emma Raducanu, and nothing against Emma, but Serena clearly was nothing like the Serena we've come to know. So to get as competitive and as fit as she did for the US Open, and that sheer willpower was quite extraordinary. I think if she is going to come back, and of course I'd love to see her come back, but I hope she would do it the right way, because there would be nothing worse than Serena coming back and then going down 2-1 in the first round, and people saying, well, why on earth has she done that?
Yeah, and she's highlighted it herself. I think she said after her first round exit at Wimbledon that she was like, you know what, I was starting to get into this, and I think if I could have got through to the second round and built momentum from there, and we saw that in New York. I think the first few games she looked a bit rusty, and certainly having obviously lost in straight sets to Emma Raducanu in Cincinnati. Prior to that, all suggested, and I was a bit fearful for Serena going into the US Open. I thought this could really end very early.
Yeah. Well, it just shows what a champion she is, and also what an effect still she can have on, she beat Net Kontaveit, who's a fantastic player who ended 2021 in the most magnificent fashion. So, you could criticize the players that were beaten by Serena, but I think until you've gone out, especially on the Arthur Ashe Stadium court at night, and experienced that atmosphere and looked into the eyes of Serena, I know I would be shaking in my boots if I was attempting to play her. I don't care how good a player I was either.
Any other final memories from the US Open? Obviously, we have Iga getting to the final again, looking pretty strong throughout. I don't remember too many hairy moments for her. Ons as well, making the final again, beating Garcia, as I said. On the other side of the draw, of course, we had Sabalenka, who had anything but calm waters. It seemed to be drama after drama. I remember an amazing match against Kanepi. I think it was in the second or third round with match points on both sides of the net, and she prevailed there. She obviously gets to the semi-final again, Sabalenka, and it does seem to be a bit of a final hurdle for her that she can't quite seem to break through. A bit like Maria Sakkari as well, especially at slams anyway. And yeah, any other thoughts on anything I've just mentioned or the final itself?
With Sabalenka, I mean, she's had, for a long time, people making the accusation that she has not done the business at Grand Slam level, which is true to a point. But at least she's getting further, as you mentioned there. She's now made a couple of semi-finals. I love watching Sabalenka play. I mean, you never know what's coming, but I just love her personality. I love the raw power. I love what she can do. I kind of love the fact that she infuriates me at times as well. When you think, what is that? What are you doing? But it makes you want to watch every single point. So I'm going to lay my head on the block and say I think that Sabalenka will win a Grand Slam title sooner rather than later. My only other overriding memory of the closing stages of the US Open, alas, is the death of the Queen, which from a broadcasting point had a major impact on all of us, because I mean, how do you deal with that? So you're at a sporting event. A lot of the sports back home, of course, were being cancelled. This was an international tournament, so it wasn't going to be cancelled. But that was really hard, and we were all putting on our black ties. And it was a really sad, slightly flat end to proceedings because of that. So I've got very mixed memories of the last few days of the US Open.
Yeah, that would have been, I think, on the Thursday or the Friday, from memory. I remember exactly where I was when I found out I got a news notification on my phone. And just prior to that, just like a few seconds before, I was trying to get to a hairdresser's in New York. And I was looking for the entrance, and I ended up going through this rather grandiose building. And he said, "Sorry, mate." You say "mate" because that would be a very British terminology. "Sorry, you can't be in here, sir. You have to leave." As in, like, didn't have authority to be in that building. And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I looked at my phone. I went, "Oh, Queen Elizabeth has just passed away." And he went, "Yeah, you've still got to leave the building." And I was like, "Okay, fair enough." So anyway, eventually I found the hairdressers. I got the right location for that. But anyway, that was my memory of getting the notification of where I was when the Queen had passed. And then we had the final. Ons, of course, took a while to get into it, but when she did, it became a really exciting final. I think there were various moments in that second set that were dramatic. The tiebreaker itself. What are your memories of the final?
Well, funnily enough, I was flying home at the time, so I didn't see it.
Okay.
My stint finished on the weekend, so I will have to. Well, yes, I was kind of ignorant of what happened, but one of there's a great part of obviously being involved in the broadcasting of an event, but sometimes it's incredibly frustrating because you go home just when you're getting to the most juicy moments. So I was another reason why I was a little bit frustrated, because when you've been there for 10, 11 days, you want to be there till the very end. But I caught up on the highlights when I got back home, but I had no closer view to it than anybody else come the Saturday and Sunday, unfortunately.
Well, Marcus, I can fill in one or two gaps because I was fortunate enough as a fan, at least, to be in the stadium. And it really does feel a lot of the comments you made earlier about 5 sets and growing into a match. And this match, probably more than any other, I was thinking fitted that, because Ons did start to grow into it. She had chances to win that second set. And if you go into a third set, who knows where this might go? If she'd have won that second set, and into a third set. Unfortunately, we didn't quite get that drama. But I do remember thinking that Ons' game is returning. And I also do remember thinking something, I think it might have been the forehand. Someone in the live chat will get me right on this. I think the forehand sort of just fell apart a couple of times at the wrong moment for Ons. And really, do you look back? I guess we look back on Ons' year as being a fantastic year, largely titles, 2 Slam finals. Are there any what ifs, particularly, say, with the Wimbledon final?
There have got to be what ifs when you get to 2 Grand Slam finals, because unless you are an incredibly strong person, you'll be thinking, well, what if I never get to another one? Is this as close as it's going to be? And I mean, history shows that if you don't capitalize early on in one of your finals, then it becomes that much harder. I mean, Andy Murray's a classic example. He finally got there, but goodness me, the heartache before he did. So you want to try and grab that opportunity when you can. I mean, the other thing, though, I find fascinating about Iga Swiatek, as dominant as she has been, there still, to me, remains a slight degree of fragility about her. And I did notice that at times, her run to the final, as well as she's playing, to me, there's always that slight belief that, oh, well, this could go off the rails, which I know sounds absurd when you look at what she's done, whatever it is, 8 titles, 67 wins, a #1 by a mile. My mind goes back still to the back end of 2021 when I was lucky enough to be in Guadalajara for the WTA finals there. She was in tears. She didn't get through her group. I think it was, it was the end of a long year. To me, and I know she's got a very strong team around her, and I could be totally wrong about this, but to me, there is still this slight emotional fragility at times. And that keeps me wanting to watch Swiatek matches. As dominant as she is, I always think that there might be a chance for an opponent to get under her skin, which again is perhaps why Jabeur will have a real what-if feeling with regards to that second set and the tiebreak in particular. So we'll see. But, Jabeur, as we've mentioned before, is such a wonderful, such a different, unconventional player that I still think she's going to have plenty of opportunities to get that first slam.
Let's move on to Fort Worth. I know we're missing a few tournaments out, but we can't forget this little moment. Can you see what I've got on the screen here, Marcus?
Yes, that was my transport.
Talk us through this.
Well, my producer, I think, was trying to have me bumped off, quite frankly. So we went down to the Stockyard area in Fort Worth. It's a wonderful part of the world. I'd never been there before, and I had to seriously stretch to get on board that Texas Longhorn and produce what I thought was actually a really good opening link to the program. And yet some of my colleagues said it was Alan Partridge. I'm sorry, but if you're on a Texas Longhorn wearing the hat that we picked up at this wonderful bar the night before, I am not going to deliver the most conventional of lines. There was a bit of yard there and all the rest of it. I thought it was one of my best bits of work. Others have now called me Alan ever since. But it was a wonderful experience, Fort Worth. And what I want to say straight away, because I know a lot of people, their overriding memory of that week will be, well, there was nobody watching inside what is a fantastic arena, by the way, Dickies Arena. Mm-hmm. And the crowds weren't great, but there are reasons for that, which I think most people know. The fact that it was only 6 weeks earlier, 6 or 7 weeks before, that they knew for sure that they were going to hold the event there. And people criticized the WTA and say, well, why was it only 6 or 7 weeks before? Well, they had a real problem finding a venue that was prepared to lease out the stage, as it were, just for 1 year, because most of these places want to have at least a 3-year contract, which makes sense because you've got to build a tournament. And I'm quite sure if it went back to Fort Worth next year with proper planning and all the rest of it, they would get much bigger crowds. There's no doubt about that. But it was a wonderful week. It's just such a difficult situation for the WTA in terms of those finals, because we know that they're meant to be in China for that lengthy period. We know that because of COVID and everything else, and the Peng Shuai situation, there's real problems in terms of where they're going to host the tour finals. But I had a great week out there, I have to say. And
well, Marcus, if we were in any doubt, I think this photo confirmed that you had a good time.
Oh dear, oh dear. I was trying to keep that. There's another even worse picture than that, actually. But yeah,
is it on Twitter?
No, I think I've bribed a lot of that hidden. But no, it was great. It was a lot of fun. And the other unfortunate thing about those finals, it's the hours. Obviously, they weren't that conducive for a UK audience. Yeah. So stayed up all night to watch. Thank you very much indeed. But it was a lot of fun, and it produced some fantastic matches as well.
Yeah, actually, though, on the hours topic, and I'm aware of being Eurocentric on all of this, or Western centric, particularly in European Western terms, if you get me. I am aware of that, and I'm aware that there's a global audience to think about. But I do think there's a sweeter spot for the final in particular, which I think was about 3 a.m. Central European time, would have been about 2 a.m. GMT. I could be out by a short amount there, but I'm not far out. I think there's a sweeter spot for the audience than that, if you like, which can also encompass. I also think, by the way, and no one's ever going to listen to me on this topic, but I even think it would be great to start the tournament maybe on a Friday or a Saturday and finish on the following Sunday. So it stretches over 9 days, but you've got 2 solid blocks of weekends. You finish on a Sunday. It could be afternoon in Texas. It could be evening in Europe. Best of 3 sets. We're all in bed by midnight and everything's hunky-dory, and we get a more appealing, a better audience. I'm sure there's people in India that would rather at a particular time, and Australia and so on. So I'm aware of that. But that's just maybe my Eurocentric thoughts on it.
Well, I think it's a good point because Europe is dominating the tennis world to a large extent. One other problem that they had, and the reason actually that Texas Fort Worth started on a Monday was that they only got their hands on the facility, I think, the previous Friday, whatever other event they'd had on, some sort of rodeo was. And so by the time they converted the arena into a tennis facility, they could not start it before the Monday. So that was not what they ideally wanted. And you're absolutely right. You want to play it over 2 weekends, possibly can. So that Monday to Monday was taken out of their hands.
Got it.
But I don't know what's going to happen. We had long chats with Steve Simon and other members of the WTA about where the event will be held next year. They've got their hands tied by this contract in China. But of course, depending on the COVID situation, that might not be an issue. But then they've got to deal with the whole Peng Shui business. So it's a really, really difficult issue for the WTA, who I think, if I'm not mistaken, put in about 7 million either pounds or dollars, but a lot of money's worth of their own money to host the event in Fort Worth. And obviously they lost a lot of money as a result of that.
No doubt. Listen, let's talk about the tennis in Fort Worth. We saw some epic matches. I mean, Kazatkina against Garcia was probably match of the year. In fact, I was actually talking initially to you about perhaps doing a show on this. I'd emailed you and Blair Henley at the same time. Marcus, I hope that the fact that Blair got back to me and then a couple of days later, and I've got this, oh dear me. I'll tell you what, I want to do a WTA year on review anyway. So I think you'll be equally good for that. But listen, what a match that was, and what a tournament it was on the court, at least.
Yeah, and that match point, I wonder, was that the match point of the year? I know, looking on social media actually today, that my friend and former colleague Leif Shiras reckons that Angelique Kerber came up with a better one. Was it a running forehand earlier in the year? He was painting the argument for that, but it was an astonishing point. It was an astonishing match. And it, for me, we've spoken about Garcia and her stubborn refusal really to change tactics. And when she was hot in that match, she was very hot. And then you're thinking, oh my goodness me, she's not going to get over the line. There was also the subplot, of course, that she'd parted company with her coach the week before the finals, which on the face of things was a very strange decision. But there we are with Martina and Danielle. Had a great team to it with. Martina is absolutely fantastic. She's so enthusiastic, and Danny's an absolute delight as well. And I mean, Garcia was amazing, and I just love the raw emotion. It was the same in Cincinnati when she won there. There was a slight feeling, I think, of disbelief that she did what she did. When you think back to prior to June and the grass court season, when she started to get her game together, I remember saying to her, if we'd said to you at the start of June, would you be here? Or would you look at me like a complete lunatic? Yeah, she said, well, I would look at you like a complete lunatic. So of course, she didn't believe she could do what she had done. But it was a wonderful end to a fantastic week. The interesting thing now, of course, is will she kick on next year? And I look at Muguruza, who won the finals 12 months earlier. And I was looking at the rankings yesterday. Where is she now? Somewhere down in the 50s. I mean, has deserted her, which is really sad to see. And there are no guarantees. There were a whole host of debutantes in this year's finals. I think 6 of the players this year were
something like that. I think it was a record, actually.
Yeah, I think it was 6, and the year before it was 4. So you can see there's a degree of flexibility at the top of the women's game, and you can read into that what you want. But what it does show is that you can't rest on your laurels. And it's very easy now to say, oh, well, Garcia's now going to go on and she's going to win slams, this, that, and the other. No, there is no guarantee of that. Jessica Pegula, who, by the way, is one of my all-time favourites and had a really disappointing week, of course, in both the singles and the doubles, along with Coco Gauff. I'm intrigued to see how she fares next year as well. There are so many, I feel, even more unanswered questions after that week than prior to it. And I just think it makes the 2023 season all the more intriguing.
There are so many players. You touched on one or two of them there, such as Muguruza. We talked about Osaka earlier, who could, their talent is there. They could easily return and have an excellent 2023. We've obviously got the established players like Swiatek and Jabeur, and I say established in terms of this year. We've had players like Garcia, as Gene there says in the chat, coming from nowhere, from outside the top 70 to finishing at the AT or the WTA finals and end up winning it as well. We've got so many other players that are sort of there or thereabouts, but haven't quite fulfilled their potential, such as Sakkari and Sabalenka. I was pleased to see Sakkari sort of have a mini turnaround of her season in the last few weeks and making the semi-finals in Fort Worth. I thought she might go all the way, but didn't quite work out for her. Any final comments on that tournament?
Yes, actually, I'd like to talk about Sakkari, who is one of my all-time favorite players. She's got a British coach, of course, in Tom Hill as well. What I loved about her was that it was a tough year by her own very high standards. I mean, she managed to maintain a top 10 position, but at no point did she think about changing her team. And she made that very clear when we spoke to her during Fort Worth. She trusted them inside out. And what a lesson that is, because, how often, be it a tennis player, a football team or whatever, you get a few bad results. Oh, well, we're going to change the manager. We're going to change the coach. She kept faith and she benefited. She is the most delightful person to interview. I really hope she has another great year next year. And also Aryna Sabalenka, who we have mentioned, but who admitted, halfway, 2/3 of the way through the year, she was panicking. She didn't quite know what was happening. And then she got things together just in time. She qualified as a result of Guadalajara just before the finals. And she was saying by the end of that week that in many ways this was her best year, because she has discovered some more mental fortitude. And if she can maintain that through the hard times and realize that she can cope with those difficulties, then I think she's going to be an even better player as well, which again is why I think next year is so exciting, because Sakkari and Sabalenka both showed towards the end of the year that they are still very much in the equation.
Definitely. One thing that comes through with both of those players, I'm sure every single player on the WTA tour feels like this, but one thing that really seems to shine through with Sakkari and Sabalenka is they want it so much, and it sort of makes the pain of these semi-finals at slams or the WTA finals defeat, for example, for Sabalenka, it makes you feel a bit more for them when it doesn't go right.
One other thing I will also say about those 8 players who qualified, and I heard this from a number of sources, but apparently they all got on exceptionally well. There wasn't one prima donna amongst them. The WTA staff was saying they were a delight to deal with. They fulfilled all the duties that were required of them. And at the end of the week, when they had a party, not everyone was there because some had been knocked out, but Garcia went, Sabalenka went. Everybody spoke in glowing terms about them as people as well as players, which has to be a good thing for the sport too. Listen,
Marcus, you, Amazon, I hope a little bit of talking tennis as well, but also, of course, BBC Radio as well, which you touched on earlier. I think we all do our little bit for the sport as well, to varying degrees. Some of the love in the chat you may have been seeing on the screen popping up, your support as well for all of these different things and issues certainly makes a difference. And Marcus, I just want to say a big thank you for stopping by today.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed chatting, and I look forward to next year. I'm sure you do, and perhaps in 12 months' time we can sit back and reflect on more stories. I'm looking at the rankings and looking, from a British point of view, Raducanu has dropped down to 76, but I'm excited. If they can just get some stability in the camp, I'm really excited to see what she does over the next 12 months. Harriet Dart, from a British point of view as well, at 98 in the rankings, she produces every now and then some inspirational performances. So if she can get a bit more consistency and perhaps win some matches a bit quicker, because one of her problems is she seems to go to 3-set epics all the time. And this Linda, and I still can't get her name right, Fruhvirtova, who's 78 in the rankings, and who I'm tipping for really big things next year. So there's a lot of stories. I want to see Muguruza come back if possible as well. Can Swiatek maintain her dominance? What's Osaka going to do? All these questions that we've got to try over the next 12.
Know. And by the way, we could do a separate show on pronunciations as well. Marcus, I have issues. I get it, and I should know better. But my goodness me, the pressure on you to get these players' names right must be quite difficult.
The funniest one of all, actually, we haven't mentioned her, but Barbora, and I think I can say it, Krejcikova. When she was seen in the early part of 2021, there is a tape somewhere at Amazon Prime Video of me pronouncing her name, I think, in 12 different ways. So I panicked. I just bottled it. I just had to call her Barbara for a while. That is one of the challenges. I'm always a great believer in say it with confidence, and people assume you're saying it right. But when that Krejcikova, I still have no idea about that. But by the way, I saw her at the airport flying back from Fort Worth, and I know she's got another little bit of an injury. I hope she can sort things out, because obviously doubles team here again with Katerina Siniakova. What an incredible season they had to win 3 slams and reach the final of the WTA finals as well. I mean, fantastic singles player she is when fit. So I hope she can sort out her physical issues and be part of both the singles and the doubles again too.
Okay, Marcus, listen, as I say, we'll probably do a show this time next year on pronunciations and maybe a bit of tennis. Listen, Marcus, big thank you for stopping by.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And to the rest of our audience as well. Also, thank you for stopping by.